So welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And I have two guests today. So my first guest is Mike Frank, who's the CEO of Revive Therapeutics. And my second guest is Dr. Kelly Mckee, who's a senior medical and scientific advisor of therapeutics. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So Mike, I guess I'll start with you since, you kind of started this company and you are doing a lot of work with Bucillamine now. So can you just tell us a little bit about Revive Therapeutics and why you got involved with Bucillamine?
Sure. So a little history here is quite an interesting story. The company, I wasn't the founder. There were some other people that were involved prior to me that a couple of them are still advisors, but the company goes back to around 2015 timeframe. And at that time, we were looking at repurposing drugs. I was an investor in the company, and Bucillamine was a drug that started off, that we brought into our kitty. We did some work with gout with it. We ran a phase 2A study back around 2015, FDA study, and it had pretty good efficacy against colchicine. The drug actually comes out of South Korea and Japan as a 30-year safety, Bucillamine as a rheumatoid arthritis drug. And the initial work with it was around gout. We ran that, as I mentioned, that phase 2A study. And at that time, the company decided not to continue on with it and shelved it and veered off into some other areas where it has quite a bit of intellectual property in the cannabis sector for pharmacology, and also a lot of work that I'm doing right now with the team around psilocybin and psychedelics. We're doing a lot of formulation work around that. But when I looked at Bucillamine, getting back to Bucillamine, the history of it, Bucillamine had a pretty strong safety profile, 30 years. Work was done sort of in the mid-2000s on different areas of working with different areas of inflammation around different organs with the drug. It basically is a glutathione enhancer, and it had a lot of strong opportunity that I saw to potentially help COVID. So we went back to the drawing board, worked with Kelly and the team, and submitted a proposal back to the FDA sort of late last summer, and got approved to start the trial. And we really kickstarted it into the fall of 2020. It's basically a phase 3 double-blinded study with Bucillamine to treat COVID, and that basically is our lead work right now around that, and up to 50 sites, double-blinded study, up to 1,000 people. So the efficacy is only really at the end, and the safety profiles are continuing to allow us to continue the trial. And we're excited about the drug. We think that it'll play a key role. It's an anti-rheumatic, anti-inflammatory drug, and it does have some antiviral capabilities that's been discussed and worked on by University of Southern California, San Francisco campus. University of North California, San Francisco campus, in terms of field donors. It's a strong double field donor way, metabolizes in the liver, and there's been quite a bit of work on field donors in that area to show how they can help prohibit the virus from entering the ACE2 cells. So that, in combination with what we're doing in the phase 3 study, gives us sort of a good grounding to move forward, and obviously to talk to people like yourself and forums like yourself.
So you guys are now in a phase 3. So and you're doing a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, which
Right.
is the highest level of evidence available.
Right.
So is there anything that you guys can announce so far with regard to that trial, or is that something that you guys gotta?
Yeah, we have only we haven't basically, because it's double-blinded, we haven't really been able to announce much except safety profiles, and as we're working along into the trial. But we plan on finishing the trial into Q4, and obviously with vaccine.
When you say Q4, you mean like the whole study will be published by Q4?
Well, we'll be finished the study in Q4 ourselves, and I don't know exactly what date, but let's say somewhere November, December. At that time, there could be the opportunity to get EUA, or would be approached to submit there. But the key is basically we are focused around that time lag to do the trial, and we see in Q4 that we'll finish And when the data is crunched and all that, I don't, it could be maybe towards the end of Q4. And, that's our plan, right? That's our goal right now. So obviously the key here is that, EUA, when that could come, I mean, those are decisions that DSMB make, in terms of with the FDA. So we'll have to see. But the drug has a very strong safety. So there's been no issues as we continue on into the next levels, and
it's been
there'll be
used for
more
about
news
30
coming
years.
out about that shortly, about some of our thresholds.
And in terms of, again, the safety, Mike, you said, it has been used for about 30 years or so in Japan and in Korea. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, this drug, Bucillamine, has a strong safety profile. 30 years, South Korea, Japan. It's not well known in North America. And because of that safety profile, because of our open IND with gout, because of the preclinical work and animal models around other areas, the FDA, basically fast-tracked us to do this phase 3. We didn't do a phase 1, we didn't do phase 2. As I mentioned, with some of the issues around vaccine hesitancy, breakthrough illnesses, and treatments are very hot area right now. A lot of work is being done around pills that could act as a treatment, small molecule drugs. So right now you have, obviously some of the majors like Merck, Pfizer, Roche, with Atia, looking at, antiviral type of medication. We're an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-rheumatic. So, we can play a significant role with it, with some of those drugs, and without it alone. So, it fits well into the mix, I think, of the focus on treatments right now. And what's interesting is sort of now, so it's sort of a newer level playing field, obviously, with treatments. I mean, Merck has, made a lot of announcements around their drugs. So, there's going to be, I believe, room or need for several types of therapeutics. And being an anti-rheumatic, anti-inflammatory, primarily, we do play a key role.
Yeah, well, we've seen recently, I mean, there's a study that showed that just by 5 months, your rate of infection actually decreases, the effectiveness of the vaccine, decreases from about 88% to 47%. Now, it does appear to, still be relatively effective against hospitalizations up to 6 months. But of course, again, there's a lot of breakthrough infections. And, the other thing too is, we talk a lot about, like hospitalizations and deaths, but, there's also too the fact that people just don't want to be sick. They don't want, they don't want to afford, they can't afford to be off work, say, for 3 to 4 days, which is what happens to a lot of people when they do get COVID. They may not be hospitalized, they may not end up in the ICU, but they may end up, still being very sick at home for 3 or 4 days, missing work, not being able to take care of their family, whatever it is. And for people like that, I think that having a drug that can maybe reduce those symptoms and get you back to baseline quicker is something that a lot of people are going to be interested in. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have very good treatments for COVID. Like I said, the vaccine does, it appear to be fairly effective overall, but we don't have actually good treatments in hospital, which is why there's so many people who are, discussing, things like ivermectin and now Bucillamine. And so, I'm very happy that, we're discussing this today.
I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, another drug like N-acetylcysteine, for instance, N-acetylcysteine, there's been comparatives in our studies against N-acetylcysteine being an antioxidant glutathione enhancer. Our drug is 16 times more powerful. NAC has been available in Canada over the counter, and but in the US now, I believe you need a prescription. So there are different treatments potentially around, but none of them are in a phase 3 trial. So we're in a phase 3. We're basically one of the, maybe 4 or 5 companies that have a small molecule pill, and are really, as an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, could work effectively alone, as I mentioned, or in conjunction with an antiviral. And a lot of the other treatments in the past have been cumbersome in terms of rollout logistically and costs, and quite a few of them have been intravenous. Some of the drugs from Gilead or Regeneron. And they're not as convenient for people to take pills, specifically like when when you're rolling it out internationally. So that's why there's a big push for these small molecule pills that could treat COVID. So we're a small Canadian company. It's a great success story to get to this point. We're moving as fast as we can, and we obviously appreciate the opportunity to get more recognized and make a contribution here. But we do believe the science will hold up. And as I mentioned, a lot of the work that came out of San Francisco, that field donors, which we are, could help have, could give is a major impact in terms of preventing and treating COVID.
Excellent. Well, I would like to get into the mechanism of action a little bit more. And, I'm someone who's very interested in this drug because, I actually use N-acetylcysteine. I have an IV clinic where I use it. We also use glutathione. So, I think Dr. Mckee, if you don't mind, jumping in and letting us know, how does Bucillamine work and how is it compared, say, to N-acetylcysteine or glutathione?
Sure. So it's actually a very interesting drug and very interesting story. We sort of have to go back a little bit to understand some of the biochemistry behind it, and I'll try to keep this at a high level so that it won't be too hard to keep up with. But reactive oxygen species are sort of a byproduct of normal metabolism, and the generation of these reactive oxygen species, oxygen-free radicals, peroxides, and so forth, are typically, again, they're necessary for the normal homeostasis of the body as it goes through its typical processes. But under conditions of stress, reactive oxygen species tend to be produced in much greater quantities. And when they're produced in these larger quantities, they can be quite damaging to normal tissues. And some of the more common adverse effects are actually seen in the lungs, where in the context of pulmonary infections like influenza, some bacterial infections, and here with COVID and its predecessor, SARS, there have been shown in a number of studies in animal models as well as in human trials that reactive oxygen species are a significant contributor to some of the pulmonary damage that occurs with these diseases. The major, the body's principal countermeasure against reactive oxygen species is a molecule called glutathione. And glutathione acts by essentially scavenging reactive oxygen species when they sort of get out of control and start causing damage in the body.
And would you say that the reactive oxygen species, is that the main reason why we get the cytokine storm, which is,
it's related. So there's this sort of very, very complex network of interactions amongst the various immune response mediators that include cytokines and reactive oxygen species, and one sort of feeds into the other. But, and again, it's a story that's way too complicated to tell in a short period of time. But I think the bottom line is that they're so interrelated that targeting one is likely to be beneficial in targeting all of the various inflammatory cascades that result when a severe infection like COVID occurs. So, but glutathione, again, scavenges up these reactive oxygen species. And N-acetylcysteine, which you're very familiar with, is an enhancer of glutathione's activity by providing sulfur-based compounds called thiols to sort of recharge the ability of glutathione to do its job in picking up these reactive oxygen species. Well, it turns out that bucillamine is capable of providing more thiols than N-acetylcysteine, both directly and indirectly, and serves as a super efficient scavenger of reactive oxygen species. And so what we think is likely to be the big benefit here is by providing these additional thiols to sort of sop up these reactive oxygen species that are causing damage, we can dampen down the inflammatory response, dampen down the damage that's going to be occurring with COVID and some potentially other infections as well, and provide a real health benefit to people when they take the drug.
Okay, so the main mechanism of action then is decreasing overall inflammation, and that's by raising levels of glutathione, which are going to scavenge the reactive oxygen species, correct?
Well, that's its principal mode of action, but it acts as an independent oxygen scavenger in and of itself. I mean, okay. Its thiol donating capabilities go far beyond just glutathione by itself. And the added benefit, which we're just starting to get a handle on, is a direct antiviral effect. That, as Michael indicated, there's emerging evidence that the thiol groups that bucillamine, N-acetylcysteine, as well as bucillamine, but particularly bucillamine, can provide, can impair the ability of the virus to bind to the ACE2 receptor in the nasopharynx.
Okay, so it's got a couple different mechanisms of action then.
Exactly.
So
right. I mean, just on that note, Kelly mentioned there was some interesting work, which I could forward to you from University of California. I mentioned before, San Francisco campus around this mechanism of preventing the binding of the SARS virus to the ACE2 cells. So there were 4 or 5 drugs that were researched, and there's more research coming out, but we were one of the 5 in the past that they tested.
Okay, so and you guys are using this just as a treatment, so not as a prophylactic treatment, is that correct?
The current clinical trial is to administer this drug in patients with mild to moderate COVID, and which we're assessing how effectively it can keep patients from progressing to more severe disease and ending up in the hospital.
Okay, because it does appear that, just through the mechanism of action that you guys mentioned, particularly, that it prevents the entry from the cell into the ACE2 receptor. I mean, that does seem to, indicate that it may have efficacy as a prophylactic treatment as well. Like, are you guys potentially looking into that eventually, or do you just see this as a drug for the treatment of COVID once someone tests positive?
Well, the trial is based on more sort of on the anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic side. This antiviral mechanism of action is work that's been done through universities, and that's really not in a phase 3, but it does show some of that capability. But we'll have to see what we do, obviously, with some of that information in terms of how it could be added to our current trial or some other trials subsequently. But our trial is really looking at bucillamine more from, I guess, the anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic side, and just trying to show that it does potentially have some of this antiviral capability. We'll have to see when some more of this data comes out.
Yeah, we're looking at the antiviral activity as an exploratory endpoint in the current trial.
Right.
Okay, and has it been shown to be antiviral against other viruses as well? Because just comparing it to, say, something like ivermectin, ivermectin has been shown to have, some antiviral action against things like, dengue fever. So does bucillamine have that history as well as being an antiviral? Is this
I think it's early days in understanding what its potential as an antiviral is. I think it's probably premature to go down.
I mean, a lot of the work that's been done with the drugs I mentioned has been around gout in North America, and it's got that history in arthritis. There was work done, clinical work, preclinical work, animal models around reperfusion injury and areas like that, where through heart surgery, we're reducing more inflammation. But the antiviral end is something that's just sort of obviously is of interest to some people. So there's being work done on it, but we know that Bucillamine was strong anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic drug and has that capability, and that's our focus. But this antiviral side could be interesting as well, and there'll be more news on that. So stay tuned, and we'll see how that fits in. But it's a versatile drug. Bucillamine has capability to treat a lot of other areas, like cystic fibrosis and other potential other lung disorders.
Long COVID though as well is just coming to mind as well, just because we don't really know too much about long COVID right now, but it certainly exists. And I think in that process too, there's actually quite a bit of inflammation. I'd be very interested in not only how this drug treats COVID in itself when people are positive, but just through the mechanisms of action that you guys have explained, there's potential for it to be effective prophylactically. And then I also think that there's other potential for it when you actually get COVID, like you guys are doing it, and for long COVID. So there seems to be potentially, three different uses of this, and it's just, a hypothesis, but it's, a sensible hypothesis based upon the mechanisms of action that you guys are describing today.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, all that is possible, and there's potential. I know some universities that we've been talking to about looking at some of those studies in the long hauler side. Obviously, it comes down to a lot of areas like funding, and are we going to pursue those avenues? Right now, we're in the gold standard phase 3. As I said, this drug hasn't been available in North America, so it's not that well known, and it's not readily available for people to take, like N-acetylcysteine, or people can take ivermectin and acquire it through a number of different sources. People that where people buy animal feed or whatever. I mean, people are taking ivermectin. This drug hasn't been available, and it's not that well known. So the key is that we have to go through the FDA process and the clinical process to to get it into the country, obviously validate and so forth. But yes, it does have, we believe, a lot of different benefits that could address some of those other areas you're talking about, besides the anti-rheumatic, anti-inflammatory. And there's been good work, as I mentioned, on the antiviral side from California, San Francisco.
And Mike, can you just talk, about some of the specifics of the study, like how many people are in it and that type of thing?
Right. I mean, we have. It's going to be up to 1,000. I mean, the safety's been, has been approved at a number of different levels. We're looking at finishing the trial Q4, and we're coming up on, we're just finalizing some of the next threshold. We're getting at the 600 level. So, that's our mandate in terms of getting that data out to the regulatory people to review and continue on. But there's been no safety issues so far, so we're continuing on, right?
And to put that in context too, the Merck study, which got a lot of media play over the last couple of weeks or so, particularly the first couple of days when it came out. I think there was 776 people in that study, something like that. So it looks, and that got a lot of attention. So you guys have 1,000 people in your study, so which would be more than what they had. So this is not a small study that you guys are doing, and I think that you can make quite a bit of clinical judgment and calls based upon a study that does have 1,000 people, particularly if it's a randomized controlled trial, and particularly in considering the fact that we are in a pandemic and we do not have good treatments. Again, we do have the vaccine again is effective, but it's not a treatment. So that's why I'm very interested in this.
Right. I mean, the trials are a little more difficult. I mean, obviously, you got to get endpoints met, different criteria. I mean, drugs may work amazingly in labs, but endpoints have to be met. So, we're just working through the clinical process, and there's a great need for, I believe, several therapeutics, and we think that that our drug will have some key benefits around the anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic side. And, so, the key is, as I mentioned, is we're just trying to get the, word out, get better known, and obviously work through the process. And most of the trial also has been in the U.S. that we're focusing on. So it's pretty well U.S. focused. We haven't gone really to any other countries, like some of the other players, let's say on the antiviral side. So, we'll see how that develops over the next level as we continue on. If we look to bring in some other countries that have sort of a different profile of patients.
And you mentioned the safety a few times, and I just wanted to ask you quickly too. So, this drug's been used, you said, for 30 years. So are you using similar dosages that has been used before, or using higher dosages, lower dosages? Like what's the dosage like that you are using for this COVID trial, say, compared to, trials for gout or for rheumatic fever? Is it roughly the same?
Right. I mean, yeah, like when we started this trial, we were looking at, we had a placebo versus, I guess 300 or 600. So right now it's like we're focused after our first interim. The DSMB suggested we move with a higher dose, which is 600 milligrams, and that's what we're continuing on with.
And what was the dose that was used for gout?
For gout, it was a couple other doses. One was slightly higher, and then when there was a low one at this range, so it was effective.
Similar.
So, I mean, that's a good point you brought up. Obviously, certain drugs sometimes are a lot more efficacious depending on the dosage level, right? Obviously, you have to look at safety at a higher dose. I mean, other reactions that people may get if it's too high of a doses. But overall, this drug has had, a long 30-year safety. And, that's what obviously in the history is allowing us to keep moving down the trial's path. Otherwise, the trial would get stopped. But the key here is obviously it's not that well known, the drug, and we're relying on a lot of stuff that was done in another country that has a long safety. But obviously the FDA recognizes that. I mean,
So that's why you guys feel that it's not necessarily being, picked up on the media as much as some of the other drugs, just because it's not a drug that's widely prescribed in the United States or in North America right now.
Yeah, I mean, I could drill down more effective if you want to look at it. Basically, there's basically 5 companies in the world right now that have a small molecule drug in a phase 3. There's, we're an anti-inflammatory, an anti-rheumatic. We got 150 million market cap, which is, I believe in a lot of ways undervalued. You have a company called Aptly, which has working with the Fuji drug. I guess they have a partnership, and they're a Canadian company. They're also that's trailing us in market cap. But you have then the 3 majors that have a lot of eyeballs on them, like Merck, Pfizer, and Roche's drug with Atia. So it's a pretty big stage. I mean, we're a small-time Canadian company that made it to the big stage, and we're one of the 5 companies that have a small molecule drug. And obviously, we got to go through the path to get more eyeballs on it. But media is focused a lot on the big guys. So like we're doing what we can with people like yourself and other forms of communication to get the story known. And we're trying to just do that as carefully as we can.
Well, I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast are really into more natural medicines, so to speak, or alternative medicine. And it appears that like you guys explained very well, the mechanism of action of this drug is very similar to NAC or N-acetylcysteine, which a lot of people do use as a natural health product. So I think that a lot of people would probably be more open or excited to hear about this drug if they come from more of a natural health background, just because it does have that mechanism of action.
Right. I mean, the NAC thing is a good analogy. Like NAC has, as I mentioned, I mean, you can buy it in Canada, and acquire it easily, but you can't do that in the U.S. now. But as far as a glutathione enhancer, Bucillamine is a much more powerful drug, right? And if you look at some of the research done from California, San Francisco on thiol drugs, to help prevent the binding of the SARS to ACE2 cells, the 5 drugs, that they looked at, that from a little wider perspective that had an impact. I mean, we were one of those 5. You can reference that paper by VRX, and the other, drugs were more, I think, intravenous-based cancer drugs, WR-1065 cysteamine, things like that. So, and I think there'll be a lot more work around that area also coming down the path. But NAC did not make the cut; it was too weak, right? Especially on the dosage. So, Bucillamine is really in another, I believe in another league compared to that drug, N-acetylcysteine. So, but I know a lot of people do take it, and
and it's different from the other drugs too because of the anti-inflammatory effect. Like a lot of these other drugs are sort of relying on the not letting the virus attach to the ACE2 receptor, and you guys have that as a mechanism of action as well. But it seems like it's the anti-inflammatory part that seems
right. Yeah, I don't want to make so you can't, like, that kind of research is coming out of the university. It's not really it's not what the drug has been known for. More than known for an anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic, but that antiviral capability does exist. And hey, if we have that capability, and we're showing strong evidence around in the clinical trials around anti-inflammatory, anti-rheumatic, then it's a tremendous stage. It's a tremendous drug, right? So, we'll see. Like, as I mentioned, like, it's a big stage. We made it this far, and we're working as efficiently as we can. We're not the biggest company in the world, and I appreciate everybody's support in terms of moving it forward. I mean, Kelly, I don't know if you want to add anything to some of the things I mentioned, or.
No, I mean, I think it's important to understand that we're doing this trial to collect the data to support what we believe to be the benefit of the drug in treating COVID. But much of the data that we're collecting, I think, is going to be useful as Revive, takes internally its decisions about where to go from here. We're going to have a good sense for what its antiviral activity looks like by the time this trial is over. We're going to have a good handle on the details around the inflammatory response that is addressed by this drug. We're going to have clinical data that's going to point us in a direction to know whether there's a good opportunity for this drug to be used either earlier or later in COVID. Many of the pathways that are being targeted by this drug are common to other infectious disease and inflammatory conditions. And so whether this drug might be of benefit in treating severe influenza infections, whether it might be useful in treating cystic fibrosis, for example, whether it might be useful in treating some immune-mediated pulmonary disorders that we feel like reactive oxygen species could be important in the pathogenesis. We'll have a lot of that information at the end of this trial, which I think will guide some of the decisions for where to take this drug going forward. But I mean, you could probably tell from Michael and my both, we feel very strongly that this drug has a lot of potential, not only for COVID, but in other areas as well.
I'm kind of thinking, just out loud, even like anti-aging effects,
could be, yeah.
That's what I'm kind of thinking right now.
Well, and let me tell you, some of the preclinical work that's been done is very exciting with regard to what it can do in the wake of cardiac diseases, heart attacks, strokes, and so forth, by dampening down the oxidative response to the inflammation that occurs around that.
Yeah, that's a great point, because COVID is yes, it's a respiratory disease, but it's really also a vascular disease, right? So and the fact that it's able to act on that system, is another major win. So I'm very happy that you're speaking about that.
Yeah, and the other point that we sort of glossed over, but I think it's important to understand, this is an oral drug. it's very well absorbed, it distributes very well in the body, and it penetrates the tissues very well. And so, those characteristics of it really give us, even more hope that there are uses for this drug that we haven't even thought about yet.
Yeah, because I mean, there's people who have suggested, there's studies out there, I'm sure that you're well aware, that indicate that if you have COVID, obviously myocarditis we know is a massive risk from COVID, but also to stroke. So by using this drug, you may not only be treating COVID itself and the respiratory disease, but you may in fact be treating the vascular disease that comes along with it, right? So I think that's an extremely important point, and that gives you guys a major advantage over a lot of the other drugs that are being used to treat COVID right now.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, as mentioned, versatile drug, a lot of history on some of these areas you're talking about, preclinical work that weren't in clinical FDA studies around oxidative stress, reperfusion injury, heart inflammation. I mean, there's even potential to, I'm doing a lot of work in psilocybin. There's potential even to work, how Bucillamine could help TBI stroke patients, as you mentioned, in terms of some of that work. But, right now, the whole game obviously is when you're in these phase 3 studies, that's the efficacy. People want efficacy tomorrow, but we jumped over phase 1 and 2, went right into phase 3. So it's a big study, and we got to go through the process. But that, in combination with a lot of this other data and work that's been done, shows that this drug could have a key benefit. So we'll keep plugging away.
Well, I've certainly learned a lot today, and I really appreciate both you guys, coming on the show and explaining everything that you guys have explained. Is there a way that people can follow you online, learn more about Revive Therapeutics, know when you guys are releasing the study?
Right. I mean, we disseminate information obviously readily as when we can. Obviously, we're following guidelines, and if there's any other, questions, you could just email through the website, which is revivethera.com. There's general inquiry information outlets there. And also, to myself, I address a number of different questions when I can. And, we'll keep obviously, telling a story through, mediums like yourself, and, try to educate the market, and obviously, work for the greater good here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Mike. I really do appreciate it. And Dr. Mckee, I don't know if you had any final words as well.
No. I just, we're trying to do this. We're trying to gather the data as rigorously as we can, so that we can develop conclusions that are clear and without question. And I think we put a lot of effort into trying to keep this trial, design this trial in such a way to give us the answers we're looking for, and we're looking forward to the outcome when it finally reveals itself.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to the outcome too. And, thanks so much again to both of you for coming on the show. And, I'm sure that as soon as the information comes out, everyone listening is probably going to be very eager to see that information. And, hopefully it all points in a positive direction. It seems like it will so far.
We hope so. And we believe so too. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.